come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash, except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, he put on his robe and had returned to the table. He said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
In the name of the one holy and undivided Trinity. Amen. Abundance, emptiness. These two words we are invited to reflect upon over the next few days as we celebrate Holy Week and Easter. Abundance and emptiness. What comes to mind when you hear these words? Maybe abundant resources, empty bank account. Abundant confidence, knowing who you are and where you belong in the world, and then having it all taken away, all ripped away. The ground beneath your feet feeling shaky. Abundance and emptiness. The invitation at Holy Week and Easter is for us to see these two ideas, these two concepts with new eyes. To see them from the perspective of Christ's passion and Christ's resurrection. In light of the cross and in light of the empty tomb. Abundance and emptiness. Our celebration this evening begins with this image of abundance. The disciples gathered together to share their Last Supper. They've been together for 3 years, sharing ministry, sharing experiences, new challenges. You can imagine that they had relationships of intimacy, relationships that sustained them, that they had gathered together to celebrate, to share this meal together. And right in the middle of it, as often when we have abundant celebrations, is food. We know about this at St. Barnabas, don't we? That often our abundant memories have food in the midst of them. Whether it's the hearts and hands feast, or it's sharing a meal with a family at Family Promise, or it's gathering around the altar and having communion. Our memories of abundance, of fullness, are often around food. So I want to share a memory of abundance that I have that was about a meal. And this happened to me several years ago in Atlanta. I was working for a church that sponsored refugee families. And this was a refugee family from Syria. This was before the Syrian war, but this was a Kurdish family that had experienced political persecution in Syria. And so they were resettled by the United States into Atlanta, and our church helped resettle them. So the family was very, very grateful for all that we did for them. And so to show their gratitude, they invited me and a few other people over for a meal. It was during Ramadan, so this was the feast that broke the fast of Ramadan. And so we arrived at their very humble apartment and walked into the living room, and they had a tablecloth spread on the floor in the living room. It was a big round tablecloth, and there were places, and at each of the places were the family members, and they had these beaming faces, just so happy that we were there with them, and each place was set. And then there were these platters of food and all of these new and exotic smells, and it just looked and so delicious. But what I really remember about that place setting was that at each place there was a glass filled to the brim with Orange Crush soda. And the 2-liter bottle, was right there. And it was this wonderful mix of American culture and Kurdish culture, and this wonderful, abundant memory of sharing a meal, even in the midst of great loss and great sorrow. This family, even though they'd lost so much, wanted to show their gratitude, and their hospitality was overflowing. So I don't think that the disciples had Orange Crush at the Last Supper, but I do think it too was an abundant celebration in the midst of a realization that things were changing. An abundant celebration in the midst of anxiety of what was coming. But yet, and still, the disciples gathered together to celebrate and to be together this one time, this last time. Parker Palmer, who is a Quaker writer, redefines abundance for the Christian community. He says, abundance is the daily reweaving of communities of mutual aid, mutual knowing, and mutual assistance. Abundance is the daily reweaving of communities of mutual aid, mutual knowing, and mutual assistance. Abundance is knowing that no matter what happens, you are there for me as best as you can be, and I will be there for you as well as I can be. Abundance is knowing that we are sustained and held, even in the hardest times, by a network, a web of relationship. John says that at the Last Supper, after the meal was over, Jesus took a towel and wrapped it around his waist, and he took a basin and he poured water in, and he knelt at each of the disciples' feet and washed their feet. I love this description because it is so detailed and concrete. It mentions all of the details of exactly what Jesus did as he showed the disciples how to be servants to one another. Abundance, too, is concrete. Abundance is that daily turning to your neighbor and saying, I'm there for you. Abundance is the quotidian, daily turning to each other and doing the simple but often difficult acts of service and caring for one another. This is the abundance that we celebrate this week. And friends, I invite you as we move after we share our great feast and we move into the stripping of the altar and we're given this image of emptiness, this image of everything being wiped away. I invite you in those moments to think about, where do you find your abundance in the midst of loss? There may be something in this emptiness that we encounter tonight and tomorrow and in Holy Saturday that reflects some loss or deep wounding within yourself. But our Maundy Thursday invitation is to also remember and to name the abundance that you find in the midst of that. And for this we say, thanks be to God.